We spend so much time, thinking about who is teaching our young children, right? And what they're learning,
Oh.
all those incredible things.
Yeah.
But have you ever stopped to think about the space itself? The actual building, the room,
Yeah.
Loris Malaguzzi,
Yeah.
a real visionary in early childhood education.
Right.
He called the physical environment the third teacher. And that
Yes.
powerful idea, how those actual spaces where our kids, spend their days learning and growing,
Yeah.
how those spaces profoundly shape who they become.
Right.
That's what we're diving into today,
Good.
specifically for you.
So we've got some fascinating research in front of us today. Um, a really comprehensive look back at 88 different studies
Oh.
conducted over almost 6 decades,
Okay.
from way back in 1960 right up to 2018.
Wow.
And this research dug deep into the connection between the physical spaces of early childhood education and care,
Okay.
places like preschools and kindergartens, and how they influence children's psychological development.
Okay.
We're talking about how these environments affect everything, from their behavior and how they think to their emotional well-being.
Okay, so our mission today is to kind of cut through all that research and pull out the truly essential insights.
Right.
We want to give you a clear picture of what the science says about how these ECEC spaces
Yeah.
impact young minds and maybe even uncover a few surprising nuggets along the way.
Hopefully some nuggets.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So what's fascinating here is that while it feels obvious that our surroundings matter,
Yeah.
the serious systematic study of how the physical environment impacts early childhood development really took off in the latter half of the 20th century.
Mm.
As you mentioned, traditionally, the focus has been squarely on the educators and what they're teaching.
Right.
But there's been this growing worldwide understanding that the where of education is just as crucial as the who and the what when it comes to quality.
Exactly. And this review points out that initial research,
Yeah.
largely in the U.S. in the 1960s,
Right.
focused on some very specific elements, things like how crowded a room was, the impact of different colors, and the role of lighting.
Mm.
They were really trying to pinpoint the ideal physical conditions for healthy growth and learning.
And that makes sense as a starting point, breaking down the environment into pieces you can measure.
Yeah.
But then you see the impact of thinkers like Loris Malaguzzi.
Right.
His idea of the environment as the third teacher
Yeah.
really shifted how people thought about it. It wasn't just about the physical stuff anymore.
Right.
It was about how the way space is organized and what it offers could actively communicate educational ideas and really shape a child's development during those incredibly important early years.
It's such a powerful way to think about it, isn't it?
It is.
The space itself having a teaching role.
Yeah. And it wasn't just him. The Italian architect Mario Botta even said that building a school is the first pedagogical act, really emphasizing that the physical space isn't just neutral. It has built-in educational implications right from the start.
And, if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it really highlights how everything in an educational setting is connected.
Mm.
As the review stresses, the physical environment doesn't exist in its own little bubble. It's deeply intertwined with the psychological experiences of the children and all the social interactions that happen.
Right.
They give a really clear example, actually, about writing materials.
Okay.
Just having pencils and paper lying around, that's the physical part,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't automatically make a child better at writing.
Right.
The psychological outcome. It's when the educators actively encourage and support their use,
Yeah.
maybe showing them how to hold a pencil or praising their attempts.
Yeah.
That's the social dimension.
Right.
You see the real impact on literacy.
That's such a key point. And it goes beyond just objects. The review also touches on this concept of space being co-constructed through the everyday interactions between children and educators within that physical setting. It's not just a static room. It's something that's constantly being shaped by how people use it and how they relate to each other within it.
Right.
Think about how a group of children might rearrange blocks in a play area throughout the morning, constantly redefining and co-constructing that space based on their evolving games and interactions.
You can imagine how the feel of a classroom might change depending on the energy between the kids and the teacher, even if the tables and chairs stay in the same place.
Right.
The review also mentions these rating scales, like IDERS R and ISERS R, tools used to assess the quality of early childhood settings.
Right.
It's interesting that these tools specifically include ways to measure the physical space.
Yeah.
Things like how the space is organized and the kinds of materials that are available.
Absolutely. These scales really reflect the growing understanding that the physical environment is a crucial indicator of quality.
Okay.
However, the review also brings up a really interesting point about the history of this research.
Okay.
The focus hasn't been equal across all age groups.
Right, they found this huge imbalance.
Yeah.
Something like a 10-to-1 ratio of studies looking at school environments compared to preschools when they searched the PsycInfo database.
Right.
That's a massive difference, isn't it? It makes you wonder if our understanding of how preschool spaces impact development is as robust as our understanding of school environments. What are the potential blind spots that this research gap might create for parents and educators of younger children?
That's a great question. The review suggests some possible reasons for this imbalance.
Okay.
Perhaps there's been a greater emphasis on academic outcomes and formal learning processes in the context of formal schooling, leading to more research into how school buildings and classrooms might influence those specific aspects.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You can see how research might prioritize things like classroom acoustics and their impact on test scores for older children.
Right.
But it's good to hear that the review highlights an increasing policy focus on the quality of physical spaces in early childhood settings. It suggests a growing recognition that those early years are just as critical, if not more so, for laying a strong foundation.
Indeed. And when we talk about these spaces, it's so important to consider them from the perspective of the children themselves.
Yeah.
The review dedicates a significant portion to exploring how children perceive their ECC environments. And it paints a picture that can be quite different from how adults see things.
This was one of the most fascinating parts for me. The idea that children have their own very personal ways of seeing these spaces and that they can actually tell us what they prefer.
Right.
The review talks about studies where kids were asked to draw their preschools, and it's amazing which details stood out to each child.
Yep.
Some focused on the chairs and tables, others on the toys, and some even on the adults. It really highlights how they each make the space their own in their minds.
It's so interesting.
And what's also really striking is their apparent preference for outdoor spaces
Yes.
that have natural elements or a mix of natural and manufactured things compared to playgrounds that are purely artificial.
Right.
They tend to find natural environments more exciting
Yeah.
and see more possibilities for play and exploration compared to the predictability of a typical playground structure.
Right.
So if you're thinking about your child's school or even your own backyard incorporating natural elements, it seems to be a real plus.
Yeah.
Something you might see firsthand if you've ever given a child a stick versus a plastic toy.
Right.
The stick seems to unlock so much more imagination.
Totally.
Right? They see more opportunities to experiment and be creative in areas with things like trees, sand, and water. And when they're outdoors, they seem to feel a greater sense of freedom and independence and more chances to connect with each other. But interestingly, they also seem to think there's a higher chance of getting hurt in those outdoor spaces, probably because of the uneven ground and more active play.
Right. And it's fascinating that they seem to have a very specific idea about what adults do outdoors.
What's that?
Mainly that they're there to help if someone gets injured. This suggests that they might prefer more autonomy and less direct involvement from adults during their outdoor play.
Okay, this next point really made me think.
Okay.
The review points out that children actually notice and even invent spaces that adults might not even be aware of.
Oh, wow.
They create imaginary places and reinterpret the existing environment in ways that adults might completely miss.
That's fascinating.
There's a quote in the review from Kennedy who suggests that for a child, the physical environment is probably not space in the sense in which we understand the term, but a person. That really makes you think about their very personal and almost interactive relationship with their surroundings.
It really does. It highlights that their experience of space is deeply personal and goes way beyond just the physical dimensions.
Yeah.
And this personal interaction contributes to how they create shared understandings and relationships through how they use space.
Okay.
The review mentions comparisons across different countries, Canada, India, South Africa, showing how cultural norms and teaching styles influence how space and materials are used and the messages they communicate about relationships.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The review talks about research where children were actively involved in looking at their ECEC environments.
Okay.
And it turns out they are incredibly good at spotting what isn't working.
Wow.
Not only that,
Yeah.
but they can also come up with really thoughtful and creative ideas for making those spaces better for everyone.
This is so empowering, isn't it?
It is.
The idea that we should be truly listening to children's perspectives when we're designing their learning environments. And the review highlights the really positive effects of involving children in these co-design processes.
Mm-hmm.
Things like giving them a boost in their initiative, their confidence, how they communicate, and even their ability to negotiate with others.
Yeah.
It really changes the power dynamic and recognizes children as active participants in shaping their own experiences.
It completely changes how we should approach designing these spaces.
Right.
But of course, adults also have their own perspectives and priorities.
Of course.
The review also looks at what parents and educators value in ECEC physical environments.
From the parents' point of view, there seems to be a really strong desire for these places to feel welcoming and safe,
Okay.
almost like a home away from home.
Mm-hmm.
They also really value having a connection to the outdoors and spaces where children can easily interact with each other.
Right.
Things like having a front yard, a porch, and windows that let you see inside are seen as contributing to this reassuring and inviting feeling.
Right.
And practical things like the location, how visible the center is in the community, and whether it looks child-friendly, definitely play a role in where parents choose to send their children.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You want a place where your child feels comfortable and secure, and where you as a parent feel a sense of connection and trust.
Right.
Now, what about the educators? What are their main concerns and priorities when it comes to the physical environment?
Educators, understandably, really focus on how the physical space and the materials available can help them do their jobs and support the children's learning. They emphasize having enough of the right kinds of play equipment, especially things that encourage literacy as being really important.
Right.
They're also very aware of how physical features, like the shape of the room and the lighting, can directly impact how well they can work.
Right.
And they point out the practical difficulties. It's often much easier to get more toys or books than it is to change the actual structure of a room.
So for our listener who might be advocating for improvements at their child center, what's a realistic approach given these limitations and structural changes versus material upgrades?
That's a really good practical point. You could always ask for more art supplies, but asking to knock down a wall is a different story.
Right.
The review also points out how educators' own beliefs about teaching influence how they arrange the space and use materials even in subtle ways, like whether certain play areas are seen as being more for boys or girls and how they display children's artwork or learning materials. Which really shows that the physical space isn't just a neutral background. It's actively used to communicate values and learning goals.
Yeah.
Now, there's a really interesting tension that the review brings up when it comes to outdoor spaces.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, while both parents and educators almost universally agree on how important outdoor spaces are,
Okay.
especially those with natural elements
Yeah.
for children's development,
Mm-hmm.
these spaces are often not used as much for planned educational activities. They tend to be mostly for free play.
That's surprising considering how much everyone seems to value them. What are the reasons for that?
The review suggests several reasons from the educator's perspective, things like how big and where the outdoor area is,
Okay.
whether there are appropriate materials available outside, and how easy it is to move children between indoor and outdoor spaces. Cultural norms also play a role.
Okay.
In some places, outdoor play is very dependent on good weather, which can limit when and how much it's used for learning.
So sometimes practicalities and even cultural traditions can get in the way of fully using these spaces that everyone agrees are so valuable.
Right.
And there's also this interesting balancing act between wanting children to have freedom outdoors and making sure their safe isn't there.
Exactly. Adults often have this wonderful image of outdoor play as being all about freedom and exploration, maybe thinking back to their own childhoods.
Yeah.
However, educators often see outdoor play as carrying more risks than indoor activities, which can lead them to be more cautious and set more limits on the very freedom they value in theory.
It sounds like a constant negotiation between wanting to encourage independence and needing to ensure well-being.
It is.
The review also touches on the really important but sometimes complicated relationship between architects and early childhood professionals when it comes to creating effective ECEC environments.
This is a crucial area. The review found that while both architects and early childhood experts understand the need to work together, there can be real communication problems because they often speak different professional languages and have different approaches. However, the really encouraging finding is that when architects, educators, and center directors are all genuinely involved in a project from the beginning, the resulting environments tend to get much higher quality ratings. It really highlights the power of bringing different kinds of expertise together.
Absolutely. Getting those different perspectives in the room seems essential for creating spaces that truly meet the needs of both the children and the educators who work with them.
Right.
Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about how these physical environments actually impact children's behavior.
Right.
What does the research tell us on that front?
The research indicates that having spaces that aren't too crowded, have interesting and varied features, and have clearly defined areas for different kinds of activities tends to lead to more positive social interactions and helps children stay focused on what they're doing.
Okay.
Interestingly, how crowding affects children can depend on the type of play they're engaged in, and it can even influence how much aggression is seen.
So generally, more space seems to lead to better interactions. And what about having interesting features in the environment?
Having varied elements in a room, like different wall colors or changes in ceiling height, has been linked to more cooperative behavior among children. And when the play materials are more complex, think of a dress-up corner with lots of options versus just a few simple toys. Children tend to be more engaged and play together for longer periods. Having clear designated areas for different activities also helps them to focus and encourages exploration and working together.
It sounds like a well-organized and stimulating environment almost provides a framework for more positive and focused behavior. What about outdoor spaces? How do they influence behavior?
Outdoor spaces that are easily accessible and have materials that are the right size for children seem to encourage more complex play that involves both thinking and social interaction.
Okay.
Specific features like tunnels can be particularly engaging. The research also shows that younger preschool children tend to engage in more pretend play and play that involves using objects in their intended way outdoors, while older preschoolers are more likely to be involved in physical games.
And the presence of nature seems to have a really significant impact outdoors, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The review really emphasizes the powerful effect of having natural outdoor spaces and materials available. Introducing natural elements has been shown to increase how much children interact with nature, encourage them to play independently, and engage in helpful kind behaviors, and even reduce instances of antisocial behavior. It's quite remarkable that changes to the outdoor environment can actually shift how children interact with each other. So a child who might be more dominant on a traditional playground might find their social standing shift in a more natural play space.
Exactly.
And nature play in general appears to enhance crucial skills, like being able to make choices, solve problems, stay engaged, and manage their own emotions. When you compare typical playgrounds to play areas designed with nature in mind, the natural spaces often lead to more independent exploration, constructive play, pretend play, and even scientific curiosity, often without the need for teachers to directly guide them. Even having a mix of natural and manufactured elements can be beneficial, supporting a wider range of play styles. And for very young children, those open-ended natural experiences are vital for their exploration and sensory development.
It really reinforces the importance of bringing natural elements into early childhood environments whenever possible.
Right.
Now let's move on to how the physical environment affects children's cognitive development, how they think and learn.
Okay.
What does the research tell us there?
The research suggests a clear connection between learning to read and write and having dedicated literacy areas with plenty of materials like books and drawing tools. However, and this is a really important point, this positive link is much stronger when educators actively support and encourage children's use of these materials. It's that constant interaction between the physical environment and the social interaction with teachers. So it's not just about having the books on the shelf, it's about the teacher fostering a love of reading and writing in that space. Precisely.
Right.
And the review even indicates that a rich environment focused on literacy can actually help to lessen some of the negative effects of things like low income or being from a non-white ethnic background on how well children do academically. That's a really powerful implication, highlighting the potential for well-designed learning spaces to promote equity. What about other aspects of cognitive development?
That's a powerful thought.
Outdoor spaces have a clear positive impact on the development of motor skills, especially things like balance and coordination, which is likely due to the more varied and uneven surfaces they offer. When it comes to overall cognitive skills in younger preschoolers around 3 years old, the quality of the classroom environment, such as having good spaces for social interaction and clear boundaries, does seem to play a role. However, this connection isn't as strong for older preschoolers.
That's interesting. Maybe as they get older, other factors become more important in their cognitive development.
It's possible. The review also mentions some more specific findings, like how being in crowded spaces can negatively affect a child's ability to focus on a specific object against a background, although it doesn't seem to directly impact their pre-academic skills. And surprisingly, using brightly colored play surfaces has actually been found to potentially make it harder for children to pay attention during activities that require focus.
That's counterintuitive. You'd think bright colors would be more engaging.
You would, but the research suggests they might be too distracting when children need to concentrate. Importantly, the review highlights a clear positive link between the amount of time children spend outdoors and their ability to pay attention, and a negative link with symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity. This really supports the idea that outdoor experiences have significant cognitive benefits.
That definitely aligns with a lot of what we hear about the benefits of nature for focus and overall well-being. Finally, let's explore how the physical environment influences children's emotional development, how they feel, and how they express their emotions.
This is an area where the research is still growing, but there are some interesting insights. The review suggests that high-quality physical environments in preschools might actually help to prevent social-emotional problems in children. One study that used the ESERS-R, a way to evaluate the quality of early childhood settings, along with the DECA-C, which looks at young children's social and emotional skills, showed a connection between the quality of the physical space and positive factors like initiative and self-control. However, the researchers point out that we need more studies in different contexts to confirm these findings.
That's a promising area for future research. What specific features of the environment seem to support social-emotional well-being?
Creating a homey feel with comfortable, cozy spaces and attention to beauty in the environment seems to be important in childcare settings. Things like unity, how well different parts of the environment work together, and pleasantness, the overall feeling of comfort and safety, have also been linked to positive emotional development. For toddlers, having a sense of being in control, having some private space and opportunities for exploration and quiet time in their daycare environment seem to support their overall well-being. Even something as simple as having activity areas that work well together located near each other seems to contribute to a sense of competence in younger preschoolers. So it's about creating a space that feels nurturing and supportive, both in terms of the physical layout and the emotional atmosphere.
Exactly. The review also emphasizes how the ECEC environment interacts with the home environment, noting that if children experience crowded conditions in both places, it can have a greater negative impact on their emotional and behavioral well-being. On the other hand, having safe, clean, and stimulating spaces in both settings is linked to more positive caregiving. Even having a good variety of play materials available at both home and in daycare seems to be connected to toddlers, showing more independence and experiencing more positive emotions. And children's need for privacy and personal space is also really important, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The review discusses how children actively seek out cozy and intimate spaces with younger children, often preferring softer elements, and older children sometimes wanting more clearly defined private areas. When these kinds of spaces aren't readily available, children will often adapt by finding other ways to have some private time, like hiding or creating their own little nooks. It's a reminder that even very young children need those opportunities for solitude and self-regulation.
And it seems like, once again, being in nature has a positive effect on their emotional development.
Absolutely. The review concludes by highlighting the positive emotional impacts of natural outdoor environments, including an increased sense of empathy and care for nature, as well as improvements in their ability to make choices, solve problems, and manage their own emotions.
So, across the board, whether we're talking about behavior, how they think, or how they feel, the physical environment in early childhood settings plays a really significant role. As we start to wrap things up, what are some of the main themes that really stand out from all this research?
Several key themes come up again and again. The importance of designing spaces and choosing materials that are the right size and scale for children is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
Having a good variety of appropriate materials that encourage exploration and learning is also essential.
Mm,
Clearly defining different areas within a space helps children understand the environment and focus their play.
right.
Providing cozy, intimate spaces addresses their need for privacy and security. And of course, ensuring that the environment is clean and safe is fundamental for their overall well-being.
These all seem like fundamental principles, but it's so valuable to see them backed up by such a wide range of research.
It is.
And the way we understand the role of the physical environment has really changed over time, hasn't it?
Yes, there's been a real evolution in our thinking.
Mm,
We've moved from seeing the physical environment as just a neutral container to understanding it as a dynamic and active part of children's development, something that is constantly shaped by the perceptions and relationships of everyone within it, both children and adults. There's a growing appreciation for children as capable individuals whose ideas about their environment are important and should be taken into account when designing these spaces.
So the physical environment in early childhood education isn't just a backdrop, it's an active force in shaping development.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about your own experiences or any times you've watched young children in different kinds of spaces.
Absolutely. And this raises a really important question for all of us. Given how profoundly the physical environment impacts young children, how can we as a society do a better job of prioritizing the design and quality of these incredibly important early learning environments? How can we truly try to see these spaces through the eyes of a child?
Hmm.
And what small changes could we make to existing spaces that might have a significant positive impact on children's development?
Those are definitely important things to consider. And if you're interested in digging deeper into any of these areas, we really encourage you to check out resources like early childhood education journals or organizations that focus on child development and learning environments. Think about how these insights might be relevant in your own life, whether you're a parent, an educator, or just someone who cares about the well-being of young children in your community.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and sparked some new ways of thinking about the spaces where our youngest learners grow and thrive.